Hello everybody, this is Miss PG from your WCA Biology B class, and we are looking here at Unit 3, Lesson 4 on trophic levels. This is all kind of review for you guys, just a few new concepts that we're adding, but much of it has been covered already in the first couple of units. Our key words here are biodiversity, food web, keystone species, photosynthesis, primary consumer, producer, secondary consumer, sustainability, third or tertiary consumer, and trophic level. So again, we've talked a lot about this stuff. If you remember, trophic levels are just kind of levels that organisms occupy within a food chain or web. So when we look at this picture, our first level is going to be that producer level. Sometimes we call these guys primary producers. Then our very first level of consumers is called the primary consumers. This is the second trophic level. It's also sometimes known as your first order consumers. So there's multiple different synonyms that we use. In this example, it's a caterpillar. Caterpillar is eaten by a bird. The bird is our third trophic level. That's our secondary consumers. The bird is also a carnivore. That little bird can be eaten by a hawk here, and that hawk is our fourth level in the trophic levels. It's the tertiary consumer or third order consumer, right? It's a second carnivore. There's multiple different terms. It's going to be up there, the bottom of the pyramid, we would see producer, then first order, second order, and third order or tertiary consumer, right? Sometimes we have an even higher level than that. I'm going to scooch down a little bit. Sometimes we actually have something called a quaternary consumer, and that is, let's see here, says it right in this paragraph. There's sometimes another level known as a quaternary consumer. This would be something that would eat the hawk. But most ecosystems don't actually have quaternary consumers because there's not enough energy left at that point to support that level on the trophic pyramid. Sometimes we see it, most of the time we don't, but it is a possibility that it can be there. And then we kind of go through that food chain once again here. We have our primary consumer, herbivore, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and then beyond that, this is another tertiary consumer or potentially a quaternary consumer. We also have the decomposers, which play a pretty key role in ecosystems as well. Decomposers will recycle matter in an ecosystem, so they're very, very important to have in an ecosystem so that matter can be recycled, plants can continue to grow, and the ecosystem can thrive, right? Then moving on, we talk about energy that's flowing through an ecosystem. And it's just a reminder that as you move upwards in levels of organization, so you're going from your primary producers to your first order consumers, to your second order consumers, to your third order consumers, to your quaternary consumers, then you actually are losing energy with each level. So only 10% of the energy from the lower trophic level is transferred to the next higher trophic level. So if you began with your producers of 100,000 kilocalories of energy, only 10% of that or 10,000 of it will be available for the next level. And then you take 10% of that for the next level. So you just keep reducing it down by 90%. Only 10% carries over. So basically, when you get to the very top, if you have those tertiary consumers, if there wasn't a lot of energy in the primary producers to begin with, there's just not enough left over to support the needs of a quaternary consumer, that fourth order way at the top. That's why we say we don't see those very often. It also says that you use the basically the unit of kilocalorie to measure energy here. Kilocalorie is just an energy unit when you have food, which I don't have any with me right now, but sometimes I have snacks at my desk. But today I don't have snacks at my desk. But when you have like a nutrition label on the food that you eat, when it says like something is 150 calories, that actually is kilocalories. That's a measure of kilocalories. We don't say kilocalories for whatever reason. It's sometimes calories with a capital C, which is kilocalories, but the measure of calories that we see in our food is actually kilocalories. So you can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about in terms of energy here. 100,000 kilocalories, that's a lot of calories, right? And that's sometimes the amount of energy we see at that trophic level in an ecosystem. And then we move on to some practice and some questions, some check-in questions, some more practice, and then we talk a little bit about a couple of other concepts here: keystone species, biodiversity, and sustainability. So a keystone species is a organism or species within an ecosystem that plays a very, very vital role and is interconnected to many different other species. When you look at a food web involving a keystone species, there are a lot of arrows pointing to it or pointing away from it, right? And so what happens is if that species is removed from the ecosystem, the whole ecosystem can collapse because so many other key players in that ecosystem are directly dependent upon the keystone species. It can cause the ecosystem to completely collapse or change very drastically. A good example of a keystone species is a sea otter. A sea otter lives in the kelp forest, and its role in the kelp forest is as a predator. And it specifically feeds upon many different shellfish and things like that, but it also feeds on something called a sea anemone, a spiny anemone. I don't know why they're so pokey, but it likes to eat the spiny anemone. And see, the anemones are grazers, they're herbivores, and they love to eat kelp. And if there are a lot of anemones, they can totally destroy the whole kelp forest. But the sea otters like to eat the anemones, so they eat the anemones and they keep the population of the anemones in check. Without the presence of the sea otter, the anemones would be just completely overrunning the whole place, and there would be so many anemones that the kelp forest would be completely destroyed. And then the other words we see are biodiversity and sustainability. Biodiversity just essentially means how many different types of organisms you have within an ecosystem. The more abundance you have of species, then the more roles that those species will fill. It makes an ecosystem more resilient because if one organism ends up getting killed off for some reason, one species gets killed off for some reason, there are other species that are present within that ecosystem that can fill the niche in that particular ecosystem. Sustainability is the ability to maintain that ecosystem, right? And we talk oftentimes about sustainability with regards to relationships with nature and people. So, can we take stuff from an ecosystem and still not take so much that the ecosystem collapses? So, our ability to use resources from an ecosystem in a way in which we are not causing any harm or devastation to that ecosystem is considered sustainability. Sustainability and biodiversity are very closely linked together. The more biodiverse an ecosystem is, the more sustainable it is. It's more likely to be stable and to survive. So, having or increasing biodiversity is important, and reducing biodiversity and having human actions that cause the reduction of biodiversity also reduces the sustainability as well. All right, so that is everything, guys, in this particular lesson. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next one.